Well, hey there. This is Zeke, and I'm out in my workshop. And, I'm pretty saddened by, all of the news reports that I'm seeing coming out of the northeast part of America, about, what's going on in the aftermath, and quite frankly, the lead up to Hurricane Sandy. And this was a storm that was unlike most storms that have hit that part of the country. And, well, let me get right down to it. Before the storm hit, for over a week, I was watching news reports telling people they need to get out of the way of that storm. And telling people how dangerous that storm was going to be. And I live in the Pacific Northwest. And, you know, I understand to a degree that our media, well, quite frankly, I think our media is pretty goddamn treasonous, but our media likes to overblow everything. But do you really want to base your life on that notion that our media was overblowing this storm as well? Especially when it would be so convenient to just take your family and put them in the car day before the storm hit, because they knew when it was going to hit, and drive them to a higher ground and a safer location. Would it really be foolish for you to do that? I don't think so. But there have been a lot of stories about what's going on in the Northeast right now that really make me feel sorrow for my country and how ignorant so many people are. There's two stories that I'd like to highlight that I've heard. I've heard numerous reports about. And, well, I wanted to talk about them. The first one is about a man who lived in an area that it was in New Jersey, that the governor had decided was a mandatory evacuation area. And he knew it was a mandatory evacuation area, but he wanted to be a manly man, and he decided he was going to keep his family there. So he's in his, I don't remember his name even, but he was in his 60s, and he kept his father-in-law, who was in his 80s or 90s, and his wife, who was also in her 60s, and his son, who was in his 40s or something, in their house. Decided they were going to stay there. They were going to just go it alone. And in his defense, he was pretty well prepared. He had pumps, and he had a generator, and he had lots of gas and plenty of food. But the storm was far worse than he expected it to be, even though he was told it was going to be really bad. Well, make a long story short, the floodwaters came in and chased them out of the basement and then up into their second floor, and the whole neighborhood caught on fire. It turns out they all had to be rescued by, I don't really know who rescued them, because it didn't say in the story, but it was either the Coast Guard or the fire department or the police, or, some first responder group, maybe even the National Guard. And I heard him being interviewed. And he went through a litany of what he had to do to survive and help his family survive. And what he said at the end of the interview really disgusted me. He claims he's a victim. That's what he does. He doesn't think that he does, but that's what he does. And he actually said that if the government says that a place is a mandatory evacuation area, it's not good enough for them to tell you that it's a mandatory evacuation area. They should have policemen or firemen or somebody going door to door, knocking on the door, and if you refuse to leave, then you should be arrested and hauled away in a paddy wagon. So, here's the bottom line of what he's saying. I wanted to be a manly man. I wanted to be a strong American, and I made a bad decision even though I had a lot of good information. And so the government needs to take over and arrest me. That's what he's saying. And not just me, anybody else who would make a similar decision. That's not an American way of thinking. Something is seriously wrong with that way of thinking. If you have all the information and you make a bad decision, will you suffer the consequences? And here's what I'd like to see happen. Anybody, this man and his family and anybody else that made that decision to stay in an area that was obviously in danger, I'd like them to be forced to pay all of the expenses of their rescue. And they ought to be goddamn glad they're alive. Well, that's the end of the first story. The second story hits a little bit closer to home for me. There are millions of people throughout the Northeast that have no power because this storm decimated power grids and power distribution. And so they have no electricity, they have no gas, they have no natural gas, they have no way to heat their homes. And many of them are running out of food because they were not prepared. So the governments of these various states reached out to other states that were not hit by this storm and said, could you please send people up here to help us? Alabama responded in a big way. A lot of power companies from Alabama sent crews. And there are two stories that I'd like to key on about this. And the reason that this hits a little closer to home for me is because, well, to me, and the villain in this story is IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And I'm a member of that union. And I would say that I'm a reluctant member. I have no choice but to be a member of that union to work in my profession in the state that I'm in, because my state is not a right to work state. And I'll go further. The union has nothing to offer me except a retirement and medical and dental benefits. But I already have those because I'm retired military and I have my own retirement account. So I really don't need them. And the union tries to tell me how to vote. And everything they tell me, I disagree with. But that's another story that I'll get down to at another time. Anyway, Alabama is a right-to-work state, and they sent crews to try and help bring the power back up so that the people would have electricity and heat, be able to get their refrigerators back on so they don't lose all their perishable goods. And some crews from Decatur drove all the way up into Virginia, and then they were contacted by IBEW, the Electrical Workers, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And I hate the fucking union terms too. They're not my brothers and sisters. They're just fellow workers. I don't owe them a goddamn thing, and they don't owe me a goddamn thing. That's just my way of looking at it. Anyway, they were contacted by the union, and they were told that if they were going to go into the New Jersey and work, that they would have to join the union. And they said no. Well, there was a whole day where they were trying to hammer this out, and finally the people from Decatur, Alabama said, we're not going to play your game. And they turned around and went home. Now those of you in New Jersey and every other northeastern state that are stuck without power, I'd like to know, how do you feel about that? If I was living up there and I found that out, I'd be pissed at the union. Another story. Some of these folks from Alabama got all the way up into New Jersey. And they were called scumbags and scabs by union members. And the union members even threw things at them and told them to go back home. Told them that they're not going to be able to take their jobs and they're not going to be able to take money out of their pockets. Well, that's not what those folks from Alabama were trying to do. What those folks from Alabama were trying to do was come up into the northeastern states and help bring power to the people that need power. These fucking union members called them scumbags and scabs and told them to go home. Again, for those of you that are in the northeastern states that have no electricity, no heat, no way to keep your perishables from spoiling, how do you feel about that? Well, if it were me, I'd be really pissed off at the unions. Oh, and by the way, union fuckheads, they were not coming to take your jobs. I would be willing to bet if you compare the climate in Alabama to the climate in New Jersey and New York, they wouldn't want to fucking live in your state. Think about it, jackasses. They were just trying to be Americans, be charitable, and help you get that power back on for those people. What are you really afraid of? Are you afraid that they'd be better at it than you? My guess is they probably would. And that's my thoughts on it. You have a great day.